The Harbor Chart House, Episode 5, The Courtyard Garden Index. The scent of damp rosemary came through the covered passage before Nora had fully opened the portfolio. It was a cool, green scent, softened by rain and stone. Somewhere beyond the window gallery, water still rested on the courtyard leaves, though the rain itself had passed. The rosemary grew in a long bed against the inner wall, and the mild evening air carried its fragrance beneath the passage roof and into the room in slow breaths. Nora paused with one hand under the portfolio cover. The cover was made of gray board, broad enough to occupy most of the table beside the windows. Its linen ties lay loose at either side. Inside, between protective sheets, waited a group of hand-drawn plans of the Charthouse courtyard and several small gardens around the harbor. Jonas had left them ready for her evening shift, together with a wooden tray of index cards and one short note in blue pencil. The note said only, "Garden plans. Several entries incomplete. Start with the courtyard group." Below that, he had drawn a small arrow toward the first divider. Nora set the cover down carefully and drew the portfolio a little closer. The table stood at the near end of the window gallery, where she could work under the shaded lamp and still look through the glass toward the courtyard wall. From there, her route for the evening was pleasantly bounded. She would begin at this table, pass through the covered passage, to compare the drawings with the courtyard itself, and then carry the finished cards and any approved copies into the reading room. There was no need to visit the long map room, the repair room, the model room, or the print cupboard. Tonight's work belonged to 3 connected spaces, all within an easy walk of one another. She liked knowing the shape of an evening before she began it. The chart house had become more familiar over the past weeks, but she still noticed the character of each route through it. The way to the window gallery brought light from one side and the quiet of stone from the other. The covered passage changed every sound, placing a soft roof over the rustle of leaves and the faint harbor water beyond the courtyard walls. The reading room, at the end of the return path, held a deeper stillness around its long tables and the growing atlas that rested there. Nora had arrived without haste. Her shoulders felt loose beneath her cardigan, and her hands were warm from carrying her work bag along the inner quay. She moved at the steady pace of someone with enough time to see what she was doing. Even the simple acts of hanging her coat, washing her hands in the small kitchen, and bringing a cup of water to the gallery had settled her further into the evening. Now she stood comfortably at the table, her weight balanced, her breathing unhurried. The unfinished task was easy to see. Some of the index cards in the wooden tray were filled from top to bottom in Jonas's neat blue pencil. Others carried only a title and an approximate date. A few had blank lines beside the headings for place, use, and related plans. The cards were not in disorder. They had simply reached the point where someone needed to look closely at the drawings, compare them with the places they described, and decide how a reader might sensibly find them again. Nora lifted the first protective sheet. The plan beneath it showed the Charthouse courtyard in graphite, pale wash, and small touches of colored pencil. The outer walls formed an uneven rectangle. A covered passage ran along the north side. Narrow planting beds followed 2 walls, and a path crossed from the gallery door toward a bench near the sheltered corner. The bench on the plan was drawn as 3 simple lines. The rosemary bed was marked by a row of loose, upright strokes, each one no larger than an eyelash. Beside it, the planner had written evergreen herbs in a sloping hand. Across one corner of the paper lay the printed silhouette of a narrow leaf. It was not an actual leaf pressed into the sheet, but the inked impression of one made long ago as part of the plan's decoration and record. Its central vein showed clearly. The edge was slightly irregular, giving the image the calm precision of something observed rather than invented. Nora lowered her head a little to study it without touching the surface. The paper had a warm cream tone, deeper at the edges where it had been handled over the years. There were no urgent repairs to make. One corner had already been supported with a thin, well-matched Japanese tissue, and the fold along the lower margin lay flat. Tonight the work was not to mend the plan but to place it properly among the other records of the harbor. She looked at the card resting beside it. Chart House Courtyard, Planting and Path Plan, the title read. The date line had been completed. The maker's name had been copied from the lower right corner. Under Place, Jonas had written Chart House, Courtyard. Under Use, the line remained empty. 2 cross-reference lines were empty as well. Nora rested her fingertips on the edge of the card, not yet moving it. A chronological catalog would have placed the plan neatly between 2 dates and considered the work nearly done. But the portfolio held several drawings of the same small spaces made for different reasons. One recorded planting. Another appeared to show drainage along a wall. A third, visible beneath the next protective sheet, marked the width of a path and the turning space beside a bench. Sorting them only by date would tell a reader when the papers were made. It would not tell the reader why someone might want to put them side by side. That distinction would guide the evening. Nora opened her workbag and took out a small pencil case, a clean square, a soft graphite pencil, 2 slips of unbuffered paper, and the bone folder inherited from her former workshop. She placed the bone folder at the top of the table where it would be ready if she needed to ease a protective sheet or sharpen a fold in a paper enclosure. Its surface had grown smooth with years of use. Under the gallery lamp it held a quiet ivory sheen. She did not use it yet. First she arranged the index tray on her right and the blank reference slips on her left. She put her cup of water on the sill, well away from the portfolio. Then she adjusted the lamp so its light fell across the drawings without shining directly into the window. The glass reflected part of the table back at her. The gray portfolio, the pale tools, the rectangle of the wooden tray. Beyond the reflection stood the actual courtyard wall, darkened in patches by recent rain. For a moment the drawn wall and the stone wall appeared close together, one laid gently over the other. Nora smiled at the usefulness of the view. She turned the first plan so that its north mark agreed with the direction of the courtyard outside. This did not alter the document, but it changed how readily she could read it. The covered passage on the paper now ran parallel with the real covered passage beyond the gallery door. The rosemary bed lay on the corresponding side. The little bench symbol pointed toward the sheltered corner. She could see through the nearest pane. She placed the related index card above the plan. On a blank slip she wrote 3 working headings: Place, Feature, Use. The pencil moved with a soft, dry sound. She left generous space beneath each word. At Place she wrote Chart House Courtyard. At Feature she wrote Covered Path, Herb Bed, Bench. At Use she paused. That line would need observation rather than assumption. Nora looked through the window again. The courtyard was empty, as it usually was during her evening shift. Nothing moved except a few rosemary tips returning slowly to rest after a thread of air passed over them. The path stones were damp but not shining. Along the base of the opposite wall, a darker line showed where rainwater had traveled toward a grated channel. She would go out and compare the main outlines, while there was still enough evening light to see their proportions, without relying on the passage lamps. Before leaving the table, she covered the open plan with its protective sheet. She laid one of the unbuffered slips beneath the edge as a marker, so she could return to the same place without lifting several sheets. Then she closed the portfolio cover halfway, shielding the paper while keeping her place. The first small state change of the night was already visible. The courtyard plan now faced the same way as the courtyard itself. Its card sat above it, and the working slip carried 3 headings instead of remaining blank. It was not much, but it gave the task a direction. Nora picked up a narrow clipboard with 1 clean sheet attached. She added the pencil, checked that the portfolio was protected, and switched the gallery lamp to its lower setting while she stepped away. The covered passage began only a few paces from the table. As she entered it, the rosemary scent grew clearer. It mixed with the mineral coolness of wet stone and the faint, clean smell of rain caught in the timber roof. Her shoes made a low, even sound on the flags. There was no echo sharp enough to disturb the quiet. The passage simply returned each step in a softer form. She walked first to the rosemary bed. The plants were fuller than the row of strokes on the old plan, but the bed still followed the same wall. Drops of water gathered at the narrow leaves. Nora did not touch them. She stood at the path edge and compared the bed's length with the divisions in the masonry behind it. On the clipboard she wrote, "Her bed remains along east wall. Access from covered path." That word, access, seemed more useful than appearance. The plan did not merely show what had been planted. It showed how the planting could be reached without stepping into the bed. She followed the path toward the bench. Its position had shifted slightly from the earliest drawing. On the plan it sat square to the wall. In the courtyard it stood at a mild angle, leaving more room where the path turned. Nora observed the gap between the bench end and the stone edging, then noted. Bench position adjusted in later arrangement. Compare path width plan. Again, the value lay in the relationship. She turned back toward the gallery. From the courtyard, the windows showed the interior table as a warm, orderly patch of light. The portfolio waited beneath its gray cover. The index tray appeared as a small, dark block beside it. Farther along, through the next doorway, the reading room remained dim and ready. This was the full extent of tonight's journey. Paper to paving stones to cards, cards to the atlas. Nora took one more slow look at the walls. Rain had deepened the color of the lower courses and made the pale mortar lines easy to follow. The path curved just enough to guide a person around the planting bed. The covered passage kept most of it sheltered. The bench occupied the broadest point, where someone could sit without narrowing the way. These were ordinary facts. They were also exactly the facts the plan had been made to hold. Back in the gallery, Nora returned the clipboard to the left side of the table and raised the lamp. She opened the portfolio to her paper marker. The leaf silhouette appeared again beneath the protective sheet, narrow and still. She compared her courtyard notes with the unfinished card. Under use, she penciled a provisional phrase on the working slip rather than the catalog card. Planting access and walking route. It was concrete enough to test against the other drawings. She lifted the next protective sheet and found a later courtyard plan. This one used heavier pencil for the wall outlines and dotted marks for the path edges. The bench was shown at the angle she had just observed. A rain channel ran along the lower wall, joining a route she recognized from the transparent overlay prepared during an earlier evening's work. That overlay was already settled in its proper enclosure. She did not need to retrieve it tonight. The reference could be made through the catalog. She drew the second card from the tray. Its place field was complete. Its use field read drainage, but there were no related entries beneath it. Nora set it beside the first card. The 2 cards now made a quiet pair, one for planting and passage, one for water and wall. Between them lay the present courtyard, observed without hurry, and translated into a few practical words. She would continue through the portfolio in that manner, then take the finished sequence into the reading room when the comparisons were secure. The atlas there was growing, but it was not finished. It already held approved work from the walking map, the rain plans, the ferry charts, and the model harbor route. Tonight's garden material would join them only after the index made its relationships clear. For now, Nora aligned the two cards with a clean square and placed the paperweight at the top edge so the soft movement of air from the passage would not disturb them. The rosemary scent entered once more, light and damp. Nora settled into the chair, rested both feet on the floor, and drew the next courtyard plan into the lamp's warm circle. The next courtyard plan came forward between two pale protective sheets. Nora lifted the upper sheet by its supported edge and rested it against the portfolio cover. The drawing beneath was simpler than the first two. Its garden beds were only lightly indicated, and no individual plants had been named. Most of the maker's attention had gone into measurements. Short graphite lines crossed the path at several points, each accompanied by a width in feet and inches. Around the bench, a curved pencil mark showed the space needed to pass without brushing the stone border. Nora placed the clean square beside the plan, keeping it safely beyond the paper's edge. She used the square only as a guide for her eye, following the wall lines and comparing them with the heavier outlines on the later drainage drawing. The outer walls agreed. The path did not. On the earlier plan, it narrowed near the rosemary bed before opening around the bench. On the later drawing, the narrow section had been widened by moving one edge of the bed closer to the wall. That explained why the present rosemary plant stood in a long, shallow strip, rather than the deeper bed shown on the first plan. Nora brought the three related cards together. The first was for planting and access. The second concerned the rain channel. The third, still nearly blank, carried the title Courtyard Path and Seating Adjustment. She copied the measured path width onto her working slip, then wrote beneath it, "Use clear passage beside herb bed and bench." She considered the wording for a moment. It described what the plan allowed someone to do without claiming more than the drawing showed. Satisfied, she transferred the phrase to the card in her soft graphite pencil. The blank line changed beneath her hand. It now gave the plan a purpose as well as a title. Below it, in the field marked Related Plans, she wrote the catalog numbers of the planting plan and the drainage plan. On each of those cards, she added the path plan's number in return. 3 separate descriptions became a small connected group. Nora aligned the cards again. Jonas's blue pencil supplied the titles, dates, and maker names. Her graphite additions filled the open fields without imitating his hand. A later cataloger would be able to distinguish the earlier record from the evening's work. While still reading the card easily from top to bottom, she set the completed path card beneath the paperweight and moved its divider tab from pending to courtyard, path and use. The wooden tray now held one fewer unfinished card. Beyond the window, the damp wall had grown a shade darker as the evening light thinned. Its outline remained clear, but the small variations in the stones were beginning to soften. Nora decided to make the rest of her direct courtyard comparisons before that useful light faded. She closed the protective sheet over the measured plan and placed her paper marker at the next drawing. Then she looked through the remaining courtyard cards and selected those that referred to visible features. The north wall border, the covered path, the bench corner, and a low planting bed beside the gallery door. She clipped a fresh sheet over her first notes. Down its left side, she wrote the 4 features, leaving space beside each. At the threshold of the covered passage, she paused long enough for her eyes to adjust. The courtyard no longer looked like a plan laid flat. It looked enclosed and comfortably deep. The roof beams of the passage crossed overhead. The pale path continued beyond them into open air, then curved back toward shelter. Rosemary's scent lingered near the wall, while wet leaves nearer the bench gave off a softer green smell. Nora began with the north wall. The corresponding plan showed a narrow bed extending almost the full length of the stonework. On the ground, the bed stopped before the corner. leaving a small paved space beside the rain channel. She counted the broad paving stones between the bed and the turn, not as a formal measurement, but as a repeatable way to describe the difference. On the clipboard she wrote, "North bed ends 3 broad flags before corner. Leaves channel approach clear." She walked to the covered path and stood beneath its outer beam. One drawing marked the passage width at each timber post. The widths varied slightly because the old stone wall did not run in a perfectly straight line. Nora looked along the real wall and saw the same gentle irregularity. The passage had been fitted to the building rather than forced into an exact rectangle, she added. Covered route follows wall line. Width changes at posts. The bench corner required a different view. Nora approached from the gallery side, as a reader or member of staff might do when crossing the courtyard. The angled bench left a broad opening toward the sheltered passage. From the opposite direction, it also kept the route to the rain channel unobstructed. She made 2 small arrows on her working sheet, one for each approach. They were only observation marks, not additions to the historic plans. At the low bed near the gallery door, she found a modest discrepancy. The plan showed the stone edging meeting the threshold directly. In the courtyard, a single paving slab separated the edging from the doorway. The gap gave a person room to step aside while opening the door. Nora bent slightly to view the arrangement, keeping her feet on the path. The slab was the same weathered gray as the rest of the paving. It did not announce itself as an alteration. Only the comparison made its function plain. She wrote, "Paved pause beside gallery door. Compare access revision." Then she straightened and let her shoulders settle. Her round of the courtyard had been short, no more than the 4 features on her list. She did not need to inspect every plant or measure every stone. The drawings were records of chosen arrangements, and the cards needed useful points of entry, not a second drawing made in words. As she returned through the covered passage, a drop of water slipped from one rosemary tip to the soil below. The sound was too small to carry beyond the bed. Nora saw the dark point it made in the earth and continued indoors. At the gallery table, she placed the clipboard well away from the portfolio and opened the cover again. The next plan bore 2 printed leaf silhouettes, one broad and rounded, the other made of several narrow leaflets along a central stem. They occupied the lower margin beside a handwritten planting list. The impressions had been printed in muted gray-green ink, pale enough that the pencil labels remained legible. Nora did not try to identify the leaves beyond the names already written on the plan. Her task was to understand how the drawing might be used. She read the labels one by one. Some named plants, others described conditions. Shade beside wall, dry edge beneath roof, clear width at door. That final phrase matched the paved pause she had just observed. She drew the associated card from the tray. Jonas had entered its date and title in blue pencil, but had left both the use field and cross-references open. Nora wrote first on her working slip, "Place, gallery entrance bed. Feature, low edging, planted border, clear paving at threshold. Use, planting beside an unobstructed entrance." She read the line aloud in a voice no louder than the movement of paper. Planting beside an unobstructed entrance. It was accurate, though slightly formal. She shortened it on the catalog card to entrance access and border planting. The card did not need to contain the whole observation. Its purpose was to lead a reader toward the right plan. For related material, she entered the number of the path and seating adjustment. She also added the drainage plan because its channel passed the same threshold. Then she made the reciprocal references on those 2 cards. Her additions were beginning to form a pattern across the tray. Plans that had previously sat near one another only because of date now linked by place and use. Path to planting, planting to entrance, entrance to drainage, drainage to wall. Nora slid a blank guide card behind the courtyard group. and wrote a temporary heading at the top. Chart House Courtyard beneath it. She made 3 indented entries. Walking and access, planting and care, rain channels and wall edges. These were not final subject headings yet. They were a working structure, light enough to revise after she had examined the harbor garden plans. Still, the guide card changed the tray visibly. Instead of a row of individual records, it now offered 3 ways into the same place. She placed the courtyard cards behind their appropriate use lines, using small removable paper tabs to mark the divisions. The tabs were uncolored and carried pencil only. If the later plans suggested better wording, she could lift them away without leaving adhesive or pressure marks. The bone folder remained at the top of the table. Nora brought it down when the protective enclosure around the next plan opened unevenly along an old crease. She did not press the historic sheet itself. She slipped a clean paper guard beneath the enclosure flap and ran the broad side of the bone folder gently along the guard. The enclosure settled into its intended fold, giving the plan more room to lie flat. When she removed the guard, the fold remained neat. The next drawing showed a small harbor garden enclosed by 2 walls and a row of railings. Its path entered from one corner, past a rectangular bed, and ended at a bench facing the water. Unlike the courtyard drawings, it contained no measured widths. Its annotations described ordinary maintenance. Turn soil at wall, leave clear edge by railing, move bench inward in wet weather. A printed leaf silhouette marked the planting bed. Pencil arrows marked the route around it. Nora set its card beside the temporary guide. Under place, Jonas had written East Quay Garden. Under use, nothing had been entered. Nora looked at the drawing without trying to fit it too quickly into the courtyard headings. The location was different, and the plan's purpose might be different as well. Yet the same kinds of relationships appeared. A wall, a path, planting, a bench, and enough clear space for someone to tend the garden or walk through it. She began a second working guide. East Quay Garden. Below it she wrote, walking route, plant care bench position. The similarity between the 2 guide cards was useful, but she kept them separate. A reader might search first by place and then by use. There was no reason to flatten distinct gardens into one general category. She added the garden plan's number under all 3 headings in pencil. Then on its individual catalog card she entered use, maintenance route, and waterside seating. The phrase joined practical care with ordinary presence. It said what the plan organized without making the plan grander than it was. A second East Quay drawing showed the same garden after the rectangular bed had been divided into 2 narrower strips. Between them ran a stepping path, marked by 3 flat stones. The bench had been moved inward, just as the earlier annotation suggested for wet weather. Nora placed the drawings side by side within their separate protective sheets. She weighted the enclosure edges with clean fabric-covered snakes, never touching the plans themselves. The state change was easy to see. One plan held a single bed and an outer path. The other held 2 beds, a short central step, and a bench drawn farther from the railings. Neither canceled the other. Together they recorded 2 useful arrangements of the same small garden. She entered the second number on the East Quay guide and cross-referenced the 2 cards. Then she returned to the courtyard group and added bench position beneath its walking and access heading. The exact arrangement differed, but the point of entry would help someone comparing how seating affected routes in more than one place. The index was becoming more than a chronological list, though it was not complete. Several plans remained beneath the portfolio sheets, and their cards still waited in the pending section. Nora left them there. She removed the fabric weights, closed the East Quay plans beneath their protective sheets, and returned the bone folder to the top of the table. On her right, the finished card stood behind 2 place guides. On her left, the pending cards occupied a smaller portion of the tray than before. At the center, the portfolio remained open to the next garden plan, its margin just visible beneath the paper marker. Nora checked each new pencil entry against the catalog numbers printed on the enclosures. She touched the card, then the enclosure label, then the working guide, following the three-part sequence at an even pace. Courtyard path plan, correct. Gallery entrance bed, correct. East quay garden arrangement, correct. Revised bed and bench plan, correct. She made one small correction where she had transposed 2 digits, lifting the graphite with a soft white eraser and brushing the crumbs onto a waste sheet with a clean drafting brush. The paper beneath remained undisturbed. She rewrote the number, checked it once, and moved on. At last, she gathered the loose working slips into a single stack. She did not place them in the catalog tray. They were temporary aids, carrying fuller observations than the final cards required. She tucked them beneath the clipboard for use during the next round. The finished cards stayed upright behind their new guides. Nora moved the paperweight from the top of the earlier pair and set it across the aligned guide cards instead. Its clear glass held the warm lamplight and cast a faint oval shadow over the wood of the tray. Outside, the courtyard outlines were less distinct now, but the covered path could still be followed from the gallery door to the rosemary bed and on toward the bench. Nora had already made the comparisons she needed from the fading light. The remaining work could proceed at the table. She turned to the next card in the pending section. Its title referred to a wall garden farther along the harbor, but its use field was blank. Nora placed it beside the next protected drawing and drew a fresh working slip toward her. The first round had given the index its shape. Place first, then the ways a person walked, sat, tended planting, or kept water clear along a wall. The headings remained provisional, ready for the plan still to come. With the finished courtyard cards steady beneath the paperweight and the unfinished garden group resting within reach, Nora lowered her pencil to the new slip and continued. The wall garden plan had been drawn on thinner paper than the courtyard group. Even beneath its protective sheet, it showed a slight waviness where the fibers had responded to years of changing air. The enclosure supported it well, and the drawing itself lay without strain. Nora turned the portfolio a few degrees under the lamp so the pencil annotations could be read without glare. 2 walls met at a shallow angle around a narrow planting bed. A path followed the longer wall, widened beside a bench, and ended near a small graded channel. Along the lower margin, 3 pressed leaf silhouettes had been printed in soft gray ink. One was rounded, one sharply pointed, and one divided into several fine leaflets. The catalog card identified the place as South Harbor Wall Garden. Its use field was empty. Nora began as she had with the earlier plans. On a working slip, she wrote the place name, then listed the visible features: wall bed, narrow path, bench recess, drainage edge. The plan contained no formal measurements, but short pencil marks showed where the path needed to remain clear during pruning. Another annotation asked that fallen leaves be lifted from the grate after wet weather. A third noted that the bench could stay in its recess while the wall planting was tended. Nora read the annotations twice, letting their shared purpose emerge through their arrangement. The plan was not chiefly a picture of plants, nor was it merely a record of the garden's boundary. It described how care could happen without blocking the path, and how the path could remain useful while the garden was being cared for. On the working slip she wrote, "Use shared route for tending, sitting, and keeping drain clear." She shortened the catalog wording to garden care, seeding, and clear drainage route. Then she entered the plan beneath 3 headings on the South Harbor guide card. The categories resembled those already used for the Chart House Courtyard and East Quay Garden. But the combination was particular to this place. Here, The wall and the drain mattered as much as the planting. She checked the number on the enclosure and made the reciprocal references to two related plans. One concerned the wall bed. The other showed the rain channel continuing toward the quay. As Nora returned the cards to the tray, she noticed that the wooden divider behind the South Harbor group sat slightly higher than the others. Its top edge carried an older heading in faded graphite. Plans of practical use. The divider did not belong to one garden. It stood before a small mixed group of cards that Jonas had left together near the back of the tray. Nora had assumed they were incomplete subject cards awaiting redistribution. Now that the place guides had begun to take shape, she drew the divider forward to see what lay behind it. There were 7 cards. The first referred to walking routes. The second named rain channels and runoff. The third concerned ferry approaches. Another listed model harbor lighting references. 2 more described garden access and maintenance paths. The last card had no catalog number at all. It was made of the same cream stock as the others, though its corners were softer from handling. A former cataloger had written several lines across it in ordinary pencil. The hand was compact and practical, with no decorative title and no attempt to make the note seem important. Nora placed the card flat beside the South Harbor plan. She read it silently. The note made a simple distinction. Official harbor charts were good at preserving limits, depths, marked structures, and named edges. The smaller plans kept here did something different. Taken together, they showed where people walked, where rain was guided, where ferries were approached, where lamps helped with an evening route, and how walls, paths, and planted beds were looked after. The final line suggested that such plans should be indexed by use as well as by place. Nora rested her pencil on the working slip. Nothing in the card announced a discovery. It did not propose a new theory about the collection. It sounded like a reminder left by someone who had spent enough time with the papers to know how they were most helpful. Even so, the note gave clear wording to the pattern Nora had been following all evening. She looked first at the open wall garden plan. Its boundary could have been described in a few measurements. The long wall, shallow angle, and narrow bed were all plain enough. But those facts alone would not preserve the widened place beside the bench, the clear strip needed during pruning, or the route by which leaves could be lifted from the grate after rain. The use of the place lived in the smaller marks. She turned the old note card slightly and looked at the 6 catalog cards behind it. Their headings matched work already settled elsewhere in the chart house. The walking route card brought back the rolled map from her first evening. She remembered the repaired fold lying flat after patient support, and the route traced across it from one familiar part of the harbor to another. The map had not merely recorded streets and walls. Its worn lines and practical turns showed how a person moved through them. The rain channel card corresponded to the old harbor plans she had compared on another wet evening. Their transparent overlay now made the paths of ordinary runoff easy to follow without altering the drawings beneath. The official outlines had shown the quay. The added observations showed how water crossed it and where it was guided away. The ferry approach card belonged with the cloth-back charts already sorted and properly enclosed. Those charts contained more than the ferry line over water. Their folds, landing references, and repeated approach marks preserved the way the route was used from shore to shore. The model lighting card recalled the cleaned harbor model, and the small lamps matched to an ordinary evening passage. The model gave the harbor shape, but the sequence of lamps made movement through that shape understandable. Now the garden plans contributed paths beside beds, spaces around benches, access along walls, and channels kept clear by routine care. Nora did not need to retrieve any of the earlier material. Each piece had already been repaired, arranged, or recorded in its proper place. Its settled state was enough. The cards before her acted as references, allowing the completed work to remain undisturbed. She drew the transparent paperweight closer and placed it over the upper edge of the former cataloger's note. The glass made the pencil writing beneath it appear a little darker. "By place and by use," Nora said quietly. The words were not a new instruction. They confirmed the structure already emerging in the tray. She reviewed her temporary guide cards. Chart House Courtyard led to walking and access, planting and care, rain channels and wall edges. East Quay Garden led to its walking route, plant care and bench position. South Harbor Wall Garden now led to garden care, seating and clear drainage. Until this moment, Nora had treated those headings as a sensible method for tonight's portfolio. The older card showed why that method belonged to the collection as a whole. A reader searching only by date might find a sequence of drawings. A reader searching by place might find everything associated with one courtyard or garden. But a reader searching by use could place a walking map beside a path adjustment, a rain overlay beside a garden grate, or a ferry approach beside a sequence of model lamps. The papers did not compete with the official charts. They preserved a different scale of truth. Boundaries described where the harbor was. These plans described how it was ordinarily crossed, tended, drained, lit, and shared. Nora let the thought remain modest. The collection did not require a grand statement. Its purpose was visible in the work itself. A clear path at a doorway, a bench turned enough to leave room. A planted edge kept within reach, a route made legible in rain or evening light. She lifted the paperweight and examined the back of the note card. It was blank. There was no date and no name, only a faint indentation where it had once rested against another penciled card. She did not try to identify the writer. The note's usefulness did not depend on knowing who had made it. It belonged with the catalog aids, not with the historic plans, and it raised no question that needed to be carried beyond the evening. Nora set it beside the temporary guide cards and returned her attention to the 7 mixed references. Their present order followed no clear pattern. She did not rearrange them at once. Instead, she laid 2 blank cards on the table and used them as temporary headings. On the first she wrote, "Find by place." On the second, "Find by use." Beneath the second heading, she listed the working terms already supported by the plans and earlier records: walking and access, water and drainage, ferry approaches, evening route lights, planting and care, seating and clear passage. She left room between the lines. These were working entries, not yet the completed index. Some might be combined, and each would need its proper cross-references checked before it could guide a reader reliably. Still, the visible arrangement changed. The place guides formed one row beside the portfolio. The use headings formed another beside the older note. Between them, the catalog cards could now be read in 2 directions. Nora selected the walking route reference and placed it beneath walking and access. She set the rain channel card beneath water and drainage, the ferry card beneath ferry approaches, and the model lighting card beneath evening route lights. The garden cards required more than one connection. Rather than move each card into only one group, she wrote its catalog number beneath every relevant heading. The Chart House Courtyard path appeared under walking and access and seating and clear passage. The South Harbor Wall Garden appeared under water and drainage as well as planting and care. The East Quay plans linked planting, walking, and bench position. This was the practical advantage of an index. A plan could remain safely in one enclosure while its card offered several honest routes toward it. Nora used the clean square to keep the temporary headings aligned. Her pencil moved slowly, adding 1 number at a time. After each entry, she checked the enclosure label or the existing card before continuing. No number was carried forward from memory alone. The rosemary scent returned through the covered passage, fainter now but still recognizable. It rested among the dry smells of card, graphite, and old paper. Beyond the gallery windows, the courtyard walls had lost most of their detail in the deepening evening, though their broad shape remained. The covered path was a pale band beneath the roof, and the bench occupied its familiar wider space. Nora looked from the real courtyard to the first garden plan still visible in the portfolio. The walls agreed in outline. The plan added the history of chosen arrangements, where a bed had been narrowed, where a path had widened, where a bench had turned, where water had been given room to pass. The index would allow those choices to be found without requiring a reader to know the date of each drawing in advance. She placed a small removable tab on the older note card and wrote, "Index Principle, Place and Use." Then she returned the card behind its faded divider. It remained part of the working catalog history, protected by the surrounding cards and easy to find again. She did not copy its sentences or turn them into a display label. A concise cross-reference would be enough. The portfolio still contained several plans, and the missing links among them had not yet all been entered. The approved copies had not been added to the reading room atlas. That work belonged to the next stage, after every number and heading had been checked. For now, the discovery had done its part. It had explained why the two rows on the table belonged together. Nora gathered the use cards into their new provisional sequence, keeping the place guides separate. She laid the former cataloger's note at the head of the working group and set the transparent paperweight across the aligned upper edges. The glass held them steady without hiding the pencil. To the left rested the open portfolio, with the South Harbor wall garden beneath its protective sheet. To the right stood the wooden tray, its unfinished section smaller and its new roots more distinct. Between them lay the paired headings, Find by Place and Find by Use, ready for the cross-references that would follow. Nora rolled her shoulders once and settled both feet beneath the chair. The question of why these ordinary plans were kept no longer needed to remain open. They kept visible the daily shape of the harbor. Not only its boundaries, but the calm, repeated ways people moved through it and cared for it. With that understanding resting plainly among the cards, Nora drew the next unfinished garden entry into the pool of lamplight and prepared to connect it to the index. Nora placed the next unfinished card beneath the heading Find by Place. It belonged to the South Harbor Wall Garden Plan already open beneath its protective sheet. Jonas had entered the title, date, and place in blue pencil. Nora's working phrase for its use rested on the slip beside it. Garden care, seeding, and clear drainage route. Now the former cataloger's practical note changed what she did with that phrase. Instead of adding only one related plan number, Nora drew 3 narrow lines in graphite beneath the existing entry. On the first, she wrote the reference for planting and care. On the second, she entered the rain channel plan connected with the garden grate. On the third, she added the courtyard path adjustment, where a bench and a planted edge had also been arranged to leave passage clear. The plans came from different parts of the harbor, but the comparison was exact enough to be useful. Each showed how a bounded place remained comfortable to walk through, while ordinary care continued around it. Nora checked every number against its card before moving to the next line. She then turned to the use index and entered the South Harbor Plan beneath 3 headings: water and drainage, planting and care, seating and clear passage. The same document now had 4 honest ways of being found: by its place, by the care of its bed, by the route beside its drain, and by the space maintained around its bench. That was the small, practical choice the older note had made possible. Nora would not force each plan into a single subject. She would let the paper remain in one safe sequence, while the index offered several routes toward it. She returned the completed card to the South Harbor Place group and moved its removable tab out of pending. The unfinished section of the tray narrowed again. The next plan showed a garden along the west side of the inner quay. A low wall occupied the upper edge of the drawing. Below it, 2 long beds ran beside a gently bending path. The printed silhouette of a many-lobed leaf lay near the title. Its ink softened to a gray-green shadow. Pencil annotations appeared at 3 points along the path. One marked the space where a person could turn with a watering can. Another noted a clear strip at the wall for tending the farther bed. The third indicated that the path widened near its entrance, so 2 people could pass without stepping onto the planted edge. Nora did not need to visit this garden. The bounded route for her evening remained the window gallery, the courtyard, and the reading room. The plan itself supplied enough evidence for its catalog entry, and its place had already been confirmed on the enclosure. She wrote a new place guide. Westine Quay Garden beneath it, she entered. Walking and access. Planting and care. Wallside maintenance. On the individual card she added, use tending route and clear passing space. She cross-referenced it with the Charthouse Courtyard Path Plan. Then entered its number beneath walking and access and planting and care on the use index. The visible pattern grew without becoming crowded. Nora left a full line between each use heading and its references. Where one heading required several numbers, she arranged them in catalog order rather than by date. The point was to help a reader move from a practical interest to the relevant plans. Dates remained available on the individual cards when needed. She used the clean square to align the entries. Then she compared the West Inner Quay number on the enclosure, the place guide, the individual card, and the use index. All 4 agreed. Nora shifted the card from pending to its place group. A final garden plan waited behind it. This one described a narrow planted strip beside a harbor stair. The stair itself was shown only as an adjoining feature. The plan's attention stayed on the wall bed and the paved landing above it. 2 pencil notes asked that the landing edge remain clear and that clipped stems be gathered from the top step after the bed was tended. There was nothing dramatic in the instruction. It recorded the simple cooperation between planting and passage. Nora wrote, use, wallbed care beside a clear landing. She added the plan beneath planting and care and walking and access. Under water and drainage, she made no entry. Although the stair would certainly receive rain, the drawing did not describe runoff or a channel. The index needed to remain generous in its roots but precise in its claims. She set the pencil down briefly. That restraint mattered as much as adding a reference. A useful index did not connect everything, merely because a connection could be imagined. It followed what the plans actually showed. Nora looked along the 2 working rows. The place guides named the Charthouse Courtyard, East Quay Garden, South Harbor Wall Garden, West Inner Quay Garden, and the narrow bed by the harbor stair. The use index offered paths through walking, water, ferry approaches, evening route lights, planting, seating, and clear passage. The earlier work of the catalog sat among the garden references without needing to be reopened. The repaired walking map remained repaired. The transparent rain overlay remained in its enclosure. The ferry charts stayed sorted in their cloth-backed group. The model harbor and its tiny lamps rested after cleaning. Their catalog numbers were sufficient to connect them with tonight's plans. Nora began the full cross-reference check at the courtyard end. She touched the first place guide, read its entries, and followed each number to an individual card. From each card she moved to the use heading that repeated it. Then she returned in the opposite direction, beginning with the use heading and finding the plan again by place. Courtyard planting and path. Correct. Courtyard drainage and wall edge. Correct. East Quay maintenance route. Correct. East Quay bench position. Correct. South Harbor Wall Garden. Correct. West Inner Quay tending route. Correct. Harbor stair landing bed. Correct. At one heading, seating and clear passage, The East Quay bench plan appeared on the place guide but not on the use index. Nora found the open line and added the missing number. At planting and care, the gallery entrance bed had likewise been omitted from the working list. She entered it beneath the courtyard references. 2 gaps became 2 pencil lines. She checked both additions from card to enclosure and back again. The missing cross-references were now present, but Nora did not yet gather the index, as though the whole evening's work were over. The catalog card still needed to remain beside the portfolio, while she selected the approved copies for the reading room atlas sequence. Jonas had marked those copies with small blue pencil ticks on their enclosure labels. The marks were plain and familiar, notations of approval rather than decoration. Nora found 4 among the garden group: the chart house courtyard planting and path plan, the East Quay maintenance arrangement, the South Harbor wall garden plan, and the West Inner Quay tending route. The original drawings would remain in the portfolio. The approved copies waited beneath them in separate archival sleeves. Nora cleared a space at the center of the table. She closed each original beneath its protective sheet, confirming that no working slip or removable tab remained inside. Then she brought forward the copy sleeves one at a time. The copies preserved the plans at a scale suitable for the reading room atlas. Their papers were clean and stable, and each sleeve carried the same catalog number as its source. The pressed leaf silhouettes appeared as printed shapes within the copied images, narrow, rounded, pointed, or divided into small leaflets. Nora arranged the 4 sleeves by the sequence established in the use index. First came the chart house courtyard, where path, planting, bench, and rain channel met within the walls visible from the gallery. Next came the East Quay garden, with its maintenance route and bench drawn inward from the waterside edge. The South Harbor wall garden followed, linking tending, sitting, and the clear approach to a drain. Last came the West Inner Quay garden, where the path widened for passing and for the turn of a watering can. The sequence moved from the chart house outward through ordinary garden use. It did not attempt to represent every planted place around the harbor. It gave the atlas a readable set of examples, each supported by the index. Nora placed a clean interleaving sheet between the copy sleeves and lifted them as one shallow stack. Before leaving the gallery, she secured the original portfolio. She lowered the remaining protective sheets, removed the temporary paper marker, and brought the gray cover down without fastening the linen ties. The portfolio was protected, but still ready for the closing round later. The index cards stayed beneath the transparent paperweight. She carried the approved copies through the short doorway toward the reading room. Her pace was slower with the broad sleeves in both hands, though the stack was light. The window gallery passed on her left in a series of dim reflections. On her right, the courtyard walls held the last cool tone of evening. The rosemary scent followed faintly from the covered passage and thinned as she entered the reading room. The atlas rested on the long table beneath its fitted cover. Nora set the copy stack beside it, then lifted the cover and folded it back just far enough to expose the waiting sequence. The atlas was growing but remained unfinished. Its earlier sections held the approved material from the walking map, the rain plans, the ferry charts, and the model harbor route. Each had its own settled place. She did not disturb them. At the open position prepared for garden plans, she laid down the first interleaving sheet. She checked the courtyard copy's catalog number against the working list she had carried on a separate slip. Then placed the sleeve into the atlas. The pale walls and path settled within the reading room sequence. She added the East Quay copy, then the South Harbor wall garden, then the West Inner Quay plan. Between the sleeves, the interleaving sheets kept the surfaces apart. The printed leaf shapes appeared at different places on each page, giving the new group a quiet rhythm of gray-green forms. Nora aligned the lower and outer edges with the flat of her hand, resting only on the sleeves. The copies now occupied their intended place. They did not finish the atlas. Later evenings would add the remaining approved material. But the garden plans had joined the walking, rain, ferry, and model records in a sequence that made their common purpose visible. A reader could follow not only where the harbor's walls and edges lay, but how people passed beside them, kept water moving, approached a ferry, used evening lights, made room around a bench, and tended a narrow bed without closing a path. Nora lowered the atlas cover over the new pages. She left no weight on it beyond the cover itself. Tonight's copies lay flat in their sleeves and required no pressing. The work remaining in the reading room was only to return the index, once its cards had received their final alignment. She carried the empty interleaving folder and her working slip back to the gallery. The route was already familiar. Long table, doorway, windows, portfolio. Outside the glass, the courtyard had become a simple arrangement of darker wall, pale path, and sheltered passage. The rosemary bed was no longer distinct leaf by leaf, but its scent still entered whenever the air moved beneath the roof. At the table, Nora compared her atlas list with the 4 blue pencil approval marks on the portfolio enclosures. Courtyard copy placed, East Quay copy placed, South Harbor copy placed, West Inner Quay copy placed. She drew a light graphite tick beside each item on the temporary slip. The slip would remain with her working notes rather than enter the permanent catalog. Then she removed the provisional headings "Find by Place" and "Find by Use." Their wording had served its purpose, but the finished guides needed proper catalog titles. On 2 clean cards she wrote, "Place Index, Courtyards and Harbor Gardens Use Index. Harbor Mouts and Care." Beneath the second title, she copied the checked headings and their references from the working card. She worked slowly, one line at a time, verifying each number again before transferring it. When the last reference was entered, she compared the clean cards with the provisional versions. Nothing had been dropped. Nothing unsupported had been added. Nora slid the finished place guides into the wooden tray. The use index followed behind its own divider. The former cataloger's note returned to plans of practical US, with its small tab identifying the principle it had supplied. The provisional cards and temporary slips moved to the working notes stack. Nora brought the clean square to the tray and pressed it gently against the lower edges of the permanent cards. They settled into an even line. She tapped neither the tray nor the cards. A slow, steady pressure was enough. The index had changed visibly over the course of the evening. What had begun as scattered titles and incomplete fields now offered routes by place and by ordinary use. The approved garden copies rested in the reading room atlas. The original plans remained protected in their portfolio. Still, Nora left the linen ties loose. Closing the portfolio and returning the settled index belonged to the next part of her route. For now, she placed the completed index cards flat beside the wooden tray, their top edges aligned beneath the transparent paperweight. The glass caught the gallery lamp and held a small, steady oval of light. Beyond them, the gray portfolio waited under its cover. Through the window, the courtyard walls enclosed the quiet dark, and the rosemary scent came softly along the covered passage. Nora rested her hands on either side of the aligned cards, ready for the short return path to the reading room. Nora stood with her hands resting on either side of the completed index cards. The cards no longer looked like separate descriptions waiting to be understood. Their place headings and use headings now led calmly into one another. A reader could begin with the chart house courtyard and find its paths, planting beds, bench, and rain channel. Or the reader could begin with walking and access, water and drainage, planting and care, or seating and clear passage, then follow those uses across several parts of the harbor. The distinction on the former cataloger's card had become concrete in the tray. Official charts preserved the harbor's measured edges. These smaller plans preserved what happened within and beside those edges, where people walked, where they made room to pass, where rain was directed, where ferries were approached, where evening lamps marked a route, and where planted beds could be tended without closing a path. The archive kept ordinary use visible. Nora read the two guide titles once more. Place Index, Courtyards and Harbor Gardens. Use Index, Harbor Moots and Care. She followed the first card down through its place names, then checked the second card's use headings. No blank line remained where a reference was required. The reciprocal numbers had been entered on the individual records. The approved copies were already in the reading room atlas, while the original plans remained beneath their protective sheets. The records were checked and ready for their final resting arrangement. Nora lifted the transparent paperweight and set it near the upper corner of the table. The cards beneath it stayed aligned. She gathered them in their checked order, keeping the place index first and the use index behind its divider. The individual garden records followed in their place groups. Before returning them to the wooden tray, she ran another check with the clean square. The lower edges met evenly. Jonas's blue pencil entries remained clear above and beside her graphite additions. The two hands could be distinguished without interrupting the sense of the record. Titles and dates led to places. Places led to uses. Uses led back to the plans. Nora slid the cards into the tray. They settled with a dry, soft whisper against the other card stock. She moved the pending divider toward the back and looked behind it. The cards from tonight's portfolio had all received their needed fields or cross-references. Their final alignment beneath the paperweight could wait until the return route had been checked. She removed the small temporary tabs from the records one at a time. Each lifted cleanly. She placed them on the working note slip, where they formed a pale row of narrow paper flags. The cards did not need another written mark. At the back of the tray, the faded divider marked plans of practical use. Nora checked that the former cataloger's note rested behind it, along with the small identifying tab she had made for the catalog history. The note had guided the index without needing to become part of the atlas or a new display. It remained where another cataloger could find it and understand why the index opened in two directions. Nora replaced the tray's wooden cover halfway, leaving it easy to lift when she carried it. Then she turned to the gray portfolio. Its linen ties lay loose across the table. The broad cover concealed the plans, but the approved copy labels remained visible along the outer edges of their sleeves. Nora opened the portfolio once more, only as far as the first protected drawing. The courtyard plan appeared beneath its sheet. In the gallery light, the printed rosemary silhouette looked darker than it had at the start of the evening. The drawn walls formed their uneven enclosure. The path past the herb bed widened near the bench and continued toward the covered route. Nora did not begin another examination. She was checking the closing sequence. She confirmed that the protective sheet covered the entire drawing. No pencil, guide slip, removable marker, or fabric weight had been left inside. The supported corner remained flat. The lower fold rested without strain. She lowered the cover over it and moved to the next enclosure. The measured path plan was clear of working material. The gallery entrance plan was protected. The East Quay copies had been removed only from their separate approved sleeves. The original drawings remained in place. The South Harbor wall garden lay beneath its proper sheet. The West Inner Quay garden and the harbor stair bed followed in order. Nora closed each section as she checked it. The portfolio gradually became a single quiet object again rather than a sequence of open working surfaces. At the final enclosure, she used the inherited bone folder only on the outer paper guard. The guard had lifted slightly where the portfolio cover met the stacked sleeves. Nora laid a clean slip over it and passed the broad side of the folder once along the fold. The guard settled. She returned the bone folder to her pencil case. Its familiar ivory surface disappeared beneath the flap, ready for another evening but no longer needed along this route. Nora lowered the gray cover fully. She brought the 2 linen ties across it, one from either side. The fabric had softened with use and lay flat beneath her fingers. She tied a loose bow at the center, firm enough to keep the cover closed but easy to reverse when the portfolio was next consulted. The open group of garden plans was now enclosed. Beside it, the index tray held the checked cards. Across the doorway, the approved garden copies rested in the growing atlas. The 3 states agreed. Originals protected, references entered, copies placed. Nora drew the portfolio a few inches away from the working edge of the table. The space it had occupied was marked only by the different fall of lamplight on the wood. She collected the drafting brush, eraser, and unused paper slips. The tools returned to her work bag. She left the clean square within reach for the one small arrangement still to come. The temporary observations remained together beneath the clipboard, separate from the permanent catalog. She did not discard them yet. They could stay with the evening's working notes until Jonas had made his ordinary morning review. They contained no unresolved question, only fuller descriptions, supporting the concise entries now in the tray. Nora placed the clipboard on top of the closed portfolio. The route before her had narrowed to the reading room. She lifted the wooden tray with both hands and walked toward the doorway. The gallery windows passed beside her, reflecting the lamp, the pale rectangle of the portfolio, and her own unhurried movement. Outside, the courtyard had simplified in the darkness. The wall was a broad plane of stone. The sheltered path showed faintly beneath the covered passage. The rosemary bed had merged into the deeper shade along its edge, though its damp scent still moved indoors. Nora paused at the gallery doorway and looked toward the real courtyard once more. Earlier she had compared the drawn bed with the planted one, the old bench position with the present angle, and the measured path with the paving that now ran beside the wall. Those details no longer needed to remain active questions. They had become entries a reader could find. The garden plans were kept because boundaries alone could not show such arrangements. A boundary could contain the courtyard. It could not show the paved pause beside the gallery door. A wall line could define the East Quay garden. It could not show why the bench had been drawn inward in wet weather. A harbor edge could locate the South Harbor bed. It could not show the shared route for pruning, sitting, and clearing leaves from the grate. The informal plans preserved those modest acts of adjustment and care. Together with the earlier walking, rain, ferry, and model records, they showed the harbor as it was ordinarily used. That was enough of an answer. It did not require a broader claim. Nora continued into the reading room. The long table waited beneath its shaded lamps. At one end, the atlas lay under its fitted cover. The new garden sequence made no visible rise beneath it. Yet Nora knew exactly where the 4 approved copies rested. After the model harbor route, and before the sections still to come. The atlas was growing. It was not finished. She set the wooden index tray beside it, leaving a comfortable space between the tray and the atlas cover. Then she lifted the tray's lid and checked the first guide card against the small label fixed to the atlas section. Courtyards and Harbor Gardens, the wording agreed. She checked the use guide behind it. Harbor Routes and Care, that wording also agreed. Nora closed the tray. The index did not need to be inserted into the atlas itself. It belonged beside the catalog, where it could guide a reader to the originals, as well as to the approved copies. Placing it near the atlas made the relationship plain, before the cards were returned to the gallery for their final arrangement. She rested one palm lightly on the tray cover and the other on the fitted atlas cover. The walking map, rain overlay, fairy charts, model route, and garden plans remained distinct pieces of work. None had been reduced to an illustration of the others. Yet the new cross-references allowed their practical uses to be followed, without disturbing their settled order. A person could begin with a path. Another could begin with rainwater. Another might look for a ferry approach, an evening sequence of lamps, a clear space around a bench, or a narrow bed beside a wall. Each route would lead through the harbor as people had actually crossed and cared for it. Nora removed her hands and looked along the table. Nothing else needed to be added to the sequence this evening. No further document waited to be opened. The portfolio was closed in the gallery, and every approved copy chosen from it had been placed. The index entries had been checked. Only the quiet physical arrangement of the cards remained before they could rest for morning. She lifted the tray again for the short return to the gallery. It would stay there with the portfolio rather than remain beside the atlas overnight. The visit to the reading room had served its purpose. The copied garden plans and the index agreed. On the return walk, Nora's steps followed the same line through the doorway and along the windows. The gallery lamp cast a narrow pool over the closed portfolio. Beyond it, the covered passage framed the courtyard path. The route looked smaller now that no further comparison was required. It was simply the familiar way from the gallery to the rosemary bed and the sheltered bench. Nora set the tray to the right of the portfolio. She removed the clipboard from the gray cover and placed it with the temporary notes at the far end of the table. Then she slid the portfolio and tray closer together, leaving their edges parallel. The portfolio held the drawings. The tray explained how to find them. The atlas held the approved copies in its growing sequence. Nora adjusted the linen bow so its loops rested flat. She turned the tray's label toward the room where Jonas would see it at the morning handover. In blue pencil, his earlier title remained visible. Beneath it, Nora added no further wording. The entries already said what they needed to say. She lowered the gallery lamp by one setting. The wood of the table darkened around the closed portfolio. The card tray retained a narrow line of warm light along its rim. Through the windows, the courtyard walls stood quietly around the pale path. The damp rosemary scent arrived again, gentler than before. Nora sat down for a moment, letting the narrowed route settle into its simple order. From the table to the courtyard. From the courtyard back to the cards. From the cards to the atlas. From the atlas to the closed portfolio and the checked index. The route had returned her to the place where the evening began, but the table was no longer arranged for inquiry. The plans were enclosed, the pencil annotations had become reliable catalog entries, and the ordinary uses of the harbor could now be found without searching blindly through dates. The archive kept them because they showed the life within the lines: walking, tending, draining, approaching, lighting, sitting, and passing. Nothing was hidden in that purpose. It was present in the width of a path, the angle of a bench, the clear edge of a grate, and the small printed silhouettes of leaves. Nora rose and drew the completed index cards from the tray once more. She placed them flat on the table for the morning review, with the place index above the use index and the related garden records beneath. The transparent paperweight waited near the upper corner. The clean square lay beside the cards. Behind them rested the closed gray portfolio. Beyond the window stood the courtyard walls, and the rosemary scent moved softly under the covered passage. Nearby, the reading room atlas held its new garden pages safely inside. It was growing and useful, but still unfinished. Nora rested her fingertips near the lower edges of the cards, ready to bring them into their final straight line beneath the waiting paperweight. Nora's fingertips rested near the lower edges of the completed index cards. The place index lay first. The use index followed beneath it, and the related garden records formed a careful row below. Their edges were nearly even, but not yet in the final straight line prepared for morning. The clean square waited beside them. The transparent paperweight rested near the upper corner of the table. Nora brought the square gently against the lower edges of the cards. With slow, steady pressure, she guided them until every edge met the same clean line. The cards shifted only slightly against the wood, making a dry whisper that ended as soon as they were straight. She removed the square and set it aside. Then she lifted the transparent paperweight and lowered it across the upper edges of the cards. The glass settled without strain, holding them flat, while leaving Jonas's blue pencil and her graphite additions plainly visible beneath its clear surface. The completed index now rested in its final arrangement. Behind the card stood the closed gray portfolio. Its linen bow lay flat at the center. The cover no longer opened toward a plan or a waiting comparison. It held the courtyard and harbor garden drawings in their settled order, each beneath its protective sheet. The approved copies were already placed where they belonged in the reading room atlas. Nothing on the table asked Nora to continue. She sat with both feet resting comfortably on the floor and her hands loose in her lap. Her shoulders had lowered during the return from the reading room. The steady work of checking, carrying, and closing had left a quiet rhythm in her arms, though the movement itself was finished. From the covered passage came the scent of damp rosemary. It was lighter now than when she had opened the portfolio. Earlier, the scent had led her toward the courtyard, where the bed followed the wall, and drops of rain rested on the narrow leaves. Now it came to her without requiring observation. The rosemary remained outside along the sheltered path. The path remained between the old walls. The walls required no further comparison with their pencil outlines. Nora looked through the nearest window. The courtyard had settled into broad, familiar shapes. Its walls enclosed an ordinary darkness softened by the pale path. The covered passage was a deeper band beneath its roof. The rosemary bed blended with the shadow at the base of the stone. The bench could no longer be studied in detail from the gallery, but its place was known. Its slight angle had already been compared with the earlier drawing. The wider space beside it had already been entered under walking and access, then connected with seating and clear passage. The arrangement did not need to be seen sharply to remain useful. Nora let her gaze return to the cards. The graphite additions were still visible beneath the lamp. Jonas's blue pencil titles and dates remained distinct from her evening entries. Place, use, and related plan numbers rested together without crowding one another. The two hands belonged to different rounds of the same practical catalog work. Jonas had prepared the titles, dates, and names during the daytime catalog. Nora had used the quiet evening to compare the drawings, notice their working relationships, and complete the open fields. The cards did not conceal the stages of their making. They held them plainly, blue pencil beside graphite, each mark doing only the work required of it. The completed place index began with the Charthouse courtyard. Beneath that heading, the garden plans could be found by their walls, paths, beds, benches, and channels. The use index offered another approach through the ordinary activities the drawings preserved. Walking, tending, sitting, keeping water clear, and passing comfortably beside planted edges. Those routes had been checked in both directions. A reader beginning with a place could reach its uses. A reader beginning with a use could reach the right place. The original plan could remain protected inside the portfolio, while the index led toward it. The approved copy could remain in the atlas, while the same number connected it with the wider catalog. The work had become calm enough to leave alone. Nora rested back in the chair. The gallery lamp made a narrow field of warmth over the cards and the front edge of the portfolio. Beyond that field, the table softened into shadow. The wooden tray weighted to the right, its label turned outward. Its cards had already been checked, and those laid out for morning review needed only to remain flat beneath the glass. The window returned a faint reflection of the arrangement. In the reflection, the cards were pale shapes. The paperweight was a dim oval. The portfolio cover appeared almost the same gray as the courtyard stone beyond it. The reflected table and the dark courtyard seemed to share one quiet surface, with the window holding them gently apart. Nora breathed in. Rosemary, old paper, graphite, and the cool mineral scent of the courtyard reached her in mild layers. None was strong enough to cover the others. The gallery smelled as it had throughout the evening, only more settled now that the portfolio was closed. She breathed out slowly. The evening's route had been short. The table had led through the covered passage to the courtyard. The courtyard had led back to the plans. The plans had led through their index cards to the reading room. The reading room had received the approved garden copies, and the return path had brought Nora back to the gallery. That route was over. She would not walk it again tonight. The courtyard could remain outside the glass. The reading room atlas could remain beneath its fitted cover. The portfolio could remain tied. The cards could remain under the paperweight. Nora lowered her gaze to the printed words on the first guide card. Place Index, Courtyards and Harbor Gardens. The title was direct and sufficient. The next card read, Use Index, Harbor Moots and Care. Together, the two titles contained the useful shape of the work. One held the where. The other held the way a place was crossed or tended. Nothing further needed to be explained on the cards themselves. She had already seen how that arrangement connected tonight's plans with the work of earlier evenings. The walking map remained repaired. The rain overlay remained safely enclosed. The cloth-backed ferry charts remained sorted. The model harbor remained clean, with its tiny lamps matched to the ordinary evening route. The approved garden copies now followed them in the atlas. Each part kept its own material and purpose. Paper folds, transparent overlay, cloth backing, model lamps, index cards, pencil annotations, and printed leaf silhouettes did not need to become the same kind of record. Their connection came from the familiar harbor use they allowed a reader to follow. Nora did not rehearse that connection any further. It had already been entered where it belonged. A thread of air passed beneath the covered passage. The rosemary scent grew slightly clearer, then softened again. Nothing else in the courtyard changed. The walls held their dark outline. The pale path remained sheltered near the gallery and open in its middle. The bed lay close against the stone. On the table, the paperweight kept the card edges still. Nora looked at the faint oval of lamplight caught inside the glass. The clear surface did not hide the pencil beneath it. It gathered the light and returned it softly, so the upper lines of the index remained easy to read without appearing sharp. She let her eyes follow the straight lower edges of the cards. Earlier, those cards had stood in different parts of the tray. Some had carried only titles and dates. Others had held a place name but no use. Several had lacked the numbers that would guide a reader toward related plans. Now their alignment reflected their completed order. The courtyard record rested with the courtyard group. The East Quay Garden had its maintenance route and bench position. The South Harbor Wall Garden connected planting, seeding, and clear drainage. The West Inner Quay Plan preserved the tending route and passing space beside the beds. The Harbor Stair Planting Plan remained connected only to what it actually showed. Care beside a clear landing. Without an added drainage reference, it did not support. No card had been made to carry more than its plan could honestly provide. An index could offer several paths without claiming that every path led everywhere. It could remain useful by being exact. A wall garden might share a care route with the courtyard. A bench adjustment might be compared across two places. A clear passage might connect planting with walking. Yet each drawing stayed rooted in its own walls, beds, and pencil marks. The cards beneath the glass preserved both the connection and the distinction. Nora's hands remained in her lap. The bone folder had already been returned to her pencil case. Its work on the outer paper guard was finished, and the fold had settled without pressure on the historic sheet. The clean square had done its last small work, and now lay apart from the cards. The drafting brush and eraser were away. The temporary notes rested separately at the far end of the table for Jonas's ordinary morning review. Nothing needed to come back out. The gallery was quieter when tools were no longer moving across the wood. There was no dry sound of pencil, no soft shift of protective sheets, no whisper of cards being returned to their divisions. The remaining sounds belonged to the building and the sheltered harbor beyond it. A faint movement of air under the passage roof, the nearly absent stir of leaves, and the soft stillness of the rooms around the courtyard. Nora allowed the quiet to lengthen. She looked once toward the doorway leading to the reading room. The atlas waited nearby, outside the gallery lamp's circle. Its earlier sections and the new garden sequence were all covered. The approved copies required no pressing and no further alignment. The walking, rain, fairy, model, and garden material remained in the order already established. The atlas was growing and useful. It was still unfinished. That state was comfortable. Later approved work would join it during later evening shifts. Tonight's garden pages did not need to anticipate those additions. They had reached their proper place, and the fitted cover rested above them. Nora turned back to the window. The courtyard walls had been drawn many times, from slightly different positions and for slightly different purposes. On one plan they framed planting. On another, they guided a rain channel. On another, they defined the space available for a path and bench. Outside the glass, the walls held all those arrangements at once, without displaying any of them separately. They were simply walls now. The path was simply a path. The rosemary bed gave out its damp green scent. That simplicity was the resting form of the evening's work. The close distinctions belonged safely to the plans and cards. The present courtyard did not need to demonstrate them again. Nora's breathing had slowed with the room. She did not count the breaths or turn them into another task. She noticed only that the rise and fall beneath her cardigan had become shallow and easy, matching the reduced movement of the gallery. The lamp remained at its lower setting. Its light reached the linen bow on the portfolio, the transparent paperweight, and the upper half of the completed index. It did not reach far enough to pull the whole room into attention. The windows beyond the table were mostly dark, with the courtyard held behind them in broad tones of stone and shadow. The printed leaf silhouettes inside the closed portfolio were no longer visible. Nora remembered their quiet shapes without needing to open the cover. The narrow rosemary-like leaf, the rounded leaf, the pointed one, and the form divided into fine leaflets. They had been printed as parts of the plans, steady images beside paths, beds, and handwritten planting notes. They now rested between protective sheets. Their copies rested in the atlas. Their plan numbers rested on the index cards. That was enough continuity from one surface to another. The rosemary's scent moved in once more. Nora let it mark the distance between the real bed and the drawings that described its earlier arrangements. The distance was only a few paces across the covered passage, yet the work no longer needed her to cross it. Scent reached the table more gently than footsteps could. She stayed seated. The table held its finished pattern. Cards in front, portfolio behind, wooden tray to the right. Courtyard beyond the glass. Reading room atlas nearby under cover. Each thing had returned to a stable place, and each place belonged to the narrow route she had already completed. Nora's eyes rested again on the paperweight. Its own weight was modest. It did not press the cards hard against the table. It merely prevented the upper edges from lifting in the light air that traveled through the gallery from the covered passage. The cards remained flat. The glass remained clear. The pencil remained readable beneath it. She thought of the first blank use line she had seen when the portfolio opened. Planting access and walking route had grown from looking at the drawn bed, then at the present path beside it. From that first entry, the work had widened just enough to include benches, drains, wall edges, ferry approaches, evening lamps, and the other ordinary ways the harbor was used and cared for. Now it had narrowed again. No broad statement needed to remain active. No question remained inside the quiet. The archive kept ordinary use visible. The cards did that work in small exact lines. Nora rose from the chair without hurry. She did not lift the paperweight or touch the portfolio ties. She placed one hand on the back of the chair and guided it a little closer to the table, leaving the open floor of the gallery clear. Then she stood for a moment beside the window. The rosemary bed was almost entirely part of the dark line beneath the wall. The covered passage roof held the night close to the stone. The path retained a pale, calm curve toward the bench and back toward the gallery door. There was nowhere else she needed to go. The reading room required nothing more from her. The courtyard required no final inspection. The plans required no last opening. The cards had already been checked from number to number and from place to use. Nora lowered the gallery lamp by its final small setting. The light became softer, but it did not disappear. It remained sufficient for the closed portfolio and the cards laid out for morning. The transparent paperweight held a dimmer oval now, warm at its center and faint at its edges. She stood quietly until her eyes adjusted. The walls beyond the window became easier to see again. Their outlines were broad and restful. The pale route across the courtyard returned slowly within the dark. Rosemary's scent lay close to the passage, damp and mild. On the table, the index titles could still be read: place, use, roots, care. The words were simple enough to leave in the night. Nora looked once toward the reading room, where the atlas waited with its new garden pages protected among the earlier approved work. Then she turned her attention back to the gallery table, the same resting place at which the evening had begun. The table no longer held an unfinished task. It held the result of one. The portfolio was closed. The linen bow was flat. The atlas was growing, safely covered, and still unfinished. The courtyard walls stood around the familiar path, and beneath the transparent paperweight, the completed index cards rested in a straight, quiet line.